At the end of every year. He indeed. Bhavan, your good self. Ekaratram, one night only. Maya, with me. Ishvaraha, my husband. Ramsyate, will enjoy sex life. Apatyani, children. Cha, also. Te, your. Bhavishyanti, will generate. Aparani, others one after another. Moho, oh my dear king. So translation. Oh my dear king, you will be able to enjoy with me as my husband at the end of every year for one night only. In this way, you will have other children one after another. So you can repeat. Oh my dear king, you will be able to enjoy with me as my husband at the end of every year for one night only. In this way you will have other children one after another. So purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Although Urvashi had adversely explained the nature of woman, Maharaja Pururuva was very much attached to her, and therefore she wanted to give the king some concession by agreeing to be his wife for one night at the end of each year. So, purport is very short, and it's just basically it's reiterating what's in the translation, so we're going to keep reading. Text 40. Antarvatnim upalaksha devim saprayo purhim punastatra gato dante urvashim viramataram. Understanding that Urvashi was pregnant, Pururava returned to his palace. At the end of the year, there at Kurukshetra, he again obtained the association of Urvashi, who was then the mother of a heroic son. Text 41. Upalabhya muda yuktat samuvasatayam nisham athainam urvashi praha kripanam virahaturam. Having regained Urvashi at the end of the year, King Pururava was most jubilant, and he enjoyed her company and sex for one night. But then he was very sorry at the thought of separation from her. So Urvashi spoke to him as follows. Text 42. Gandharvam upadeha vemams tubhyam dashyanti mamiti tasya sangstu vatastushta Agnistalin dadurpa urvashim manyamanastham so buddhyata vacharam vanai. Urvashi said, my dear king, seek shelter of the Gandharvas, for they will be able to deliver me to you again. In accordance with these words, the king satisfied the Gandharvas by prayers, and the Gandharvas, being pleased with him, gave him an Adishtali girl who looked exactly like Urvashi. Thinking that the girl was Urvashi, the king began walking with her in the forest, but later he could understand that she was not Urvashi, but Adishtali. So, purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks that Pururava was very lusty. Immediately after getting the Adishtali girl, he wanted to have sex with her, but during sexual intercourse he could understand that the girl was Adishtali, not Urvashi. This indicates that every man attached to a particular woman knows the particular characteristics of that woman during sex life. Thus Pururava understood during sexual intercourse that the Adishtali girl was not Urvashi. It's not something that I would comment on. Okay? I hope you forgive me for that one. So we'll go ahead. Text 43. Stalim yasyavane gatva grihan adhyayato nishi kritayam pravriddayam manasi trayavardata. King Pururava then left Agnishtali in the forest and returned home, where he meditated all night upon Urvashi. In the course of his meditation, the Treta millennium began, and therefore the principles of the three Vedas, including the process of performing yajna to fulfill the fruitive activities, appeared within his heart. So, purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. It is said, Tritayam yajato makahai. In Treta Yuga, if one performed yajnas, he would get the results of those yajnas. By performing Vishnu yajna specifically, one could even achieve the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, yajna is intended to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. While Pururava was meditating upon Urvashi, the Treta Yuga began, and therefore the Vedic yajnas were revealed in his heart. But Pururava was a materialistic man, especially interested in enjoying the senses. Yajnas for enjoyment of the senses are called karma kandya yajnas. Therefore, he decided to perform karma kandya yajnas to fulfill his lusty desires. In other words, karma kandya yajnas are meant for sensuous persons, whereas yajna should actually be performed to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. To please the Supreme Personality of Godhead in Kali Yuga, these Sankirtana yajna is recommended. Yajnaya Sankirtana Prayarya Jantihi Sumedasa. Only those who are very intelligent take to Sankirtan yajna to fulfill all their desires, material and spiritual. Whereas those who are lusty for sense enjoyment perform karma kandya yajnas. Okay? So, Om Ganat, Timidandasha, Gananjana, Shlakaya, Chakshur, Viditam, Yena Tasmai Shikarve Namaha. So, there's several things we can understand from this verse. One is that this took place in the previous, within this cycle of yugas. Now, how do I understand that? How can I come to that conclusion that this took place?
Because Arjuna is
not really. Couldn't.
Arjuna.
No, from the verse. How can I understand this?
For the next period start.
Yeah, but within this cycle of 4 yugas, it occurred. Anybody have any hints? I'll tell you why. Because in this cycle of 4 yugas, Treta was reversed with Dwarpa. So he was in Satya Yuga. Of course, he wasn't really a Paramahamsa like most of the people in Satya Yuga. And then it turned to Treta Yuga. But normally in the cycle of yugas, it goes from Satya Yuga to Dwarpa Yuga. But only in this cycle where Lord Krishna appears and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears, you have them reversed like that. Interesting. Okay, so that's the first thing I understand from that. And let's see, other things that are interesting. Yes, so in the Satya Yuga, it's not that everybody was a pure devotee, but people, in order to achieve their particular desires, meditated. And in Treta Yuga, it's not that everybody, or Dwarpa Yuga, depending on which cycle we're talking about, it's not that everybody was performing yajna for Vishnu. In other words, one of Vishnu's names is actually yajna. That's one of the names of the Vishnu Sahasranama. That was one of the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. Now, talking about fruitive sacrifices, there's a lot of evidence that these things do occur in stories in the Bhagavatam and also in the Ramayana and other Vedic literatures, and we're going to talk about a few of those. Karma kanja, or even more demoniac rituals that are fire sacrifice. So fire sacrifices are not necessarily always in the mode of goodness, always to please Lord Vishnu, but they may be performed for demoniac purposes. And I'll give you an example, several examples from the Ramayana. Of course, you have Ravan, and Ravan was performing fire sacrifice, and his offering was not exactly ghee. He was offering his heads into the fire sacrifice, one after the other. He's known as Dasa Griva. And after offering a few heads into the sacrifice, of course they kept growing back because he had that benediction. Then what happened is Lord Brahma appeared and said, "What do you want?" And Lord Brahma gave him immunity from everything but human beings and, let's say, animals or monkeys. So that was an example of a demoniac fire sacrifice. And then also we have another example from the Ramayana of Ravana's son, Indrajit. Indrajit was known as Indrajit because he had conquered Indra. He had actually taken Indra, tied him up, and Lord Brahma had to come and rescue Indra. And Lord Brahma benedicted Indrajit, who was known previously as Meghanad. Meghanad meaning someone who has a voice like a cloud of thunder. You know, the voice of the cloud is actually thunder. And Lord Brahma gave him the name Indrajit. So Indrajit was also given the benediction of being able to perform this sacrifice before he went into battle. And he would get an invincible chariot, and nobody could defeat him. So once upon a time, during the whole Ramayana's description of the battle between Ram and the Rakshasas, Ram and his associates and the Rakshasas, then Indrajit got defeated, and he went to perform the sacrifice, which was to the deity, this demoniac deity called Nikumba. And this Nikumba was the deity was in a cave, and he had to perform this fire sacrifice, so he went there. And everyone thought that Indrajit had fled the battle. But Vibhishan informed Lord Ram that Indrajit has not fled the battle, he's gone to perform this sacrifice. And if he performs the sacrifice, you will not be able to defeat him. He'll get this invincible chariot. So, at that particular juncture, Lord Ram said to Lakshman, because Lakshman was the one who was supposed to kill Indrajit, you should go to where that sacrifice is being performed and interfere with the sacrifice, and in this way defeat Indrajit. So Lakshman took Hanuman with him. So they went to this particular place, this cave, and what happened is Hanuman went into where they were performing the sacrifice. Indrajit was going, Swaha, or whatever mantra he was saying at that particular point. The Swaha indicates the wife of Agni. There's a whole story about that in that Mahabharata, how Swaha was falling in love with Agni, and then eventually she became the mantra Swaha. So, Indrajit was performing this sacrifice, and Hanuman, in order to interfere with the sacrifice, did something very interesting. He passed urine in the sacrifice. And if you pass urine in the sacrifice, guess what happens? The sacrifice doesn't work anymore. So, therefore, Indrajit was defeated and killed by Lakshman at this particular juncture. And another demoniac sacrifice that comes to mind is the sacrifice of Vrikasura. Of course, Vrikasura was a devotee of Lord Shiva, and what he was offering in the fire was his flesh. That's a story in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. He was peeling off different layers of his flesh and offering into the fire. Lord Shiva didn't appear, even though Lord Shiva is called Ashutosh, which means easily pleased and also easily angered. So he kept offering these different pieces of flesh, one after the other. Finally he thought, Lord Shiva, if he's going to appear, I have to offer my head. So he got ready to offer his head. How are you going to offer your head? Because once you cut it off, that's it. I mean, it's kind of hard, because once you cut it off, you're not going to be able to pick it up, unless you're Ravan, of course. So then he began to offer his head, cut off his head, and Lord Shiva said, no, you don't have to do that. I'll give you anything you want. And of course, that's the famous story where this demon asks for the ability to touch anyone's head and cause the person's head to split into millions and millions of pieces. And he tried to do it on Lord Shiva because he wanted Parvati. So he kept chasing Lord Shiva. Eventually we know Lord Vishnu interceded, acting as a Shiva brahmachari, convincing the guy to test out the benediction by touching his own head. So there's an example of another demoniac sacrifice, not exactly a karma kanja sacrifice. And another demoniac sacrifice that comes to mind is when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was in Jagannath Puri, he discovered the king was taking money from the hundi and using it for his own sense gratification. Not very good. Actually, anything that's given to Krishna must be kept with Krishna. So he was offering, the king was taking the money, Bhaktivinoda Thakur caught him, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as the magistrate, fined him that he would have to supply food to Lord Jagannath something like 60-something times or 50-something times a day. And the king's treasury was running out. So the king decided, I got to get rid of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he employed Brahmins, so-called Brahmins, I guess they were tantric Brahmins, for 1 month to perform this sacrifice to kill Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So the whole month they were doing this big sacrifice to kill Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and guess what? At the end of the month, the king's son died. So that's what happens. If you perform a demoniac sacrifice or if you curse a devotee, it will come back upon you. And let's see if there's any other demoniac sacrifices I thought about. Another one, not exactly a demoniac sacrifice, but this was being done by Twasta. And this is a story in Bhagavatam. That there was this Brahmin, Visvarup, because Indra had offended his spiritual master. So then he accepted Visvarup as his spiritual master, so he could become powerful again. And Vishvarup had this habit of also offering oblations to the demons because he had a mixed family like that. And so Vishvarup's father was named Twasta. So Indra, he cut off the heads of Vishvarup. Vishvarup had 3 heads. And Twasta, who was Vishvarup's father, started to perform a sacrifice to kill Indra, to have someone who was Indra's enemy. And so he was employing Brahmanas to do that. And what happened is that one of the mantras was pronounced a little bit differently, because when you're doing sacrifices, you have to be very careful how you pronounce your mantras. Instead of saying, the person, we're going to have a kid who's going to be the enemy of Indra, then the mantra came out that this person who's going to appear, Indra's going to be his enemy. And of course that was Vritrasura, the famous story of Vritrasura, who was previously Chitraketu. And Indra eventually actually didn't end up killing him, but ended up cutting his head off. Because actually this Vritrasura, previously being Chitraketu, was a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he left his body in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, while Indra was within his body. But that's the whole story in the Bhagavatam that we've heard before. Now, as far as karma kanja rituals, so you see 5 sacrifices can be done for all sorts of different purposes. Nowadays, of course, in the Hindu society, we have this thing called Satyanarayan Katha. I don't know if any of you have heard about this before. It's a very famous katha. Katha means talk, and also they do a fire sacrifice and everything like that. And the whole purpose of it is to get you material opulence, because they tell stories that attract people to not exactly Krishna consciousness, but karma kanja stuff. And these stories illustrate that someone did Satyanarayan Katha, different stories like that. Someone did Satyanarayana Katha and they became very wealthy. Someone did Satyanarayana Katha and they got a beautiful girl as their wife. And so, people get very, very enthused with this Satyanarayana Katha. So sometimes even in ISKCON, of course we don't do Satyanarayana Katha. Hopefully we don't do Satyanarayana Katha. Sometimes even in ISKCON we use different stories like that to attract people. Does anyone think of a story like that? Who was the lady who was selling fruit? No one knows that story? No? No one knows that story. Everybody. There was a fruit seller. She came to Krishna's house, Nanda Maharaj's and Yashodamai's house, selling fruit. And she just wanted some grains in return. And Krishna came with his little hand, and all the grains sort of like trickled out between his fingers. And what happened is that I guess she got one or two little pieces of grain which weren't worth anything. And then she gave Krishna the whole basket of fruits, and what did she get? Jewels in return. And that's one of the stories that we tell. In Fiji we have a big picture of that to attract people to come to the temple. Big, big picture of that, and another picture of the Sudama Brahman story. That's another story. I mean, of course, these are pure devotional stories, but they're sometimes recited by devotees to encourage people to give donations to the Hare Krishna movement. So we have to be careful about this stuff. Anyway, so let's see. Finally, I want to end with actually 2 points. One is that Krishna talks about these different sacrifices or different Vedic rituals. In the discussion of the Bhagavad Gita, he says to Arjuna, Trigunya Vishaya Veda Nish Trigunya Bhavarjuna, Nirdwamdvo Mitu Salvasto, Niryogik Shema Atmavan. Because Arjuna is basically thinking, in one sense, of enjoying this world. Because he's thinking, how can I enjoy this world if I kill all my family members? It's better to die. And Krishna's smashing him. He's using Vedic arguments. Even Vedic arguments like, if I kill everybody, there'll be so many unprotected ladies, what's going to happen, unwanted progeny. And finally, Krishna says to Arjuna, Trigunya Vishaya Veda, that you're using Vedic arguments. And, but he says, these arguments are mainly Trigunya, from the 3 modes of material nature. Nishtrigunya Bhavarjana. But you are meant to rise above these 3 modes as a devotee. Niryoga Shema Atmavan. That you are meant to be established in Krishna consciousness. So a devotee should be interested in these karma kanja rituals. In fact, let's talk about a story from the Bhagavatam, Naimisharanya. In the beginning of the Kali Yuga, the sages at Naimisharanya were performing 1,000-year sacrifice to try to purify everybody, not understanding that the actual sacrifice was Krishna Nam Sankirtan. So to describe it, basically smoke gets in my eyes. Isn't it? They were just performing the sacrifice and there was smoke all over and they were getting all bewildered, what's going to happen, how are we going to do it? And their intention was good. It wasn't exactly karma kanja. Their intention was for the benefit of the personalities in Kali Yuga. Because, one of the first questions that was asked by them, Machonika, asked Sutta Goswami, by what are religious principles protected? Because they didn't quite understand at that point, Yagyayi Sankirtana Prayari Shanti Sumedasa. Because Sankirtan not only means, going out in the street and Harinam Sankirtan and all those other nice things like that, but Sankirtan means to recite the pastimes of Krishna. So what Shukadeva Goswami was doing, what Sutta Goswami was doing, was Sankirtan. The Bhagavatam is Sankirtan. So one of the questions the sages asked is, by what are religious principles protected now that Krishna has gone to his own abode? And of course, ultimately the answer was Krishna Sudama Bhagavate. The Bhagavatam, by the recitation of the Bhagavatam by Sankirtan, Tasman Sankirtan, Vishnor, Jangamangalang, Angasam, that's the 6th canto of Bhagavatam. Mahatam Apikoravya Vidyakantika Nishkritam. So these sages gave up their big sacrifice, because in Kali Yuga, of course, as Prabhupada mentions, sacrifices can be done, but only to promulgate the chanting of the holy names. Like Prabhupada said when they were installing the deities in Vrindavan, Krishna Balaram Mandiya, that it was the Sankirtan that installed the deities. It wasn't the fire sacrifices, which Prabhupada employed so many Brahmins, ritualistic Brahmanas in Vrindavan, so that people would respect the installation and not think, this is just a bunch of nonsense. So sometimes you got to do things just for the purpose of preaching. Like the Hari Bhakti Vilas, most of that is for the purpose of preaching. Like there's injunctions there, don't eat carrots, and things like that. So that's because people in India, or at least the ritualistic Brahmanas at that time, that if you ate carrots, you were complete malecha. So in order to have them think that we are actually, or have them understand that we're actually doing something bona fide, sometimes you've got to adapt some cultural things to your process of Krishna consciousness. And in India, of course, sometimes the devotees do that. But in the West, it's not like that. And Prabhupada, of course, did eat carrots. And it's good enough for Prabhupada, it's good enough for me. So, anyway, so we do sacrifice and things like that, but the whole purpose, as Prabhupada said, the whole reason the deities got installed in Vrindavan was because of the Harinam Kirtan that was going on at that time. The holy names, Goloka, Premadana, Harinam, Sankirtan. The holy names are a manifestation. They're descending. They're the avatar in this Kali Yuga, the holy names. You've got to remember that. Namachintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. Purashura Nityamukto Vinaklam Namanamino. I mean, how often have I recited this particular verse? Krishna is non-different from his holy name. So just by chanting Hare Krishna, then the spiritual world is manifest. Krishna is manifest. Srimati Radharani is manifest. All the Krishna's associates are manifest. Purna, Shuddha. Purna. Purna means complete. Everything is complete. So we do have sacrifices, but to get people to chant Hare Krishna. Obviously, technically speaking, all we would have to do is chant the holy name. And of course, the sacrifice and everything like that's called Pancharatriki Vidi. And Bhagavad Vidi is of course, the chanting of the holy name, the recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam. And the Pancharatriki Vidi is meant to support the Bhagavad Vidi. And of course, in one sense, we do need some aspects of Pancharatriki Vidi, like Prabhupada said, 2 tracks. The train runs on 2 tracks. It's not a monorail. It's a 1-track train. So to keep us in the mode of goodness, so we can chant, we can focus our minds on the holy name, because without being in the mode of goodness, you can't concentrate on your japa. Like if your mind is all disturbed, like if you're thinking or anxiety, like that, then how can you concentrate on the holy names? Even I've experienced sometimes if there's something happening in the world of Krishna consciousness, not the world of politics, but if there's something happening in the world, it's very hard to concentrate. That I'm anxiety about something. So the whole idea is to cultivate a mode of goodness. That's the use of Pancharatrika Vidi. And also help us understand Krishna as a person. We're doing the deity worship, etc. So anyway, so the sages performing this 1,000-year sacrifice, fire sacrifice for 1,000 years, takes a lot of ghee. Then ultimately they stop, and then they listen to Sudha Goswami recite the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's the beginning of Bhagavatam. They're talking about how the chanting of the holy names, the chanting of Krishna's pastimes is the way to manifest Krishna in this day and age, now that Krishna has gone to his own abode. So any questions or comments? Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the word
Tantra?
Tantra here.
Tantra means that which connects, is the technical definition of the word tantra.
It says here that also in systematic glory, applicable text, there is system method, instrument technical practice.
Yes, yes, it's a practice that connects.
So my question is, can you talk a little bit about tantra? Because we also understand that tantra can be black-handed.
Yeah, well, there's left-handed tantra and right-handed tantra. Tantra is simply a practice that connects. That's the real meaning of it. And you can do tantra that connects you to Krishna. You can do tantra that connects you to the mode of ignorance. You can do tantra that connects you to the mode of passion. Different sacrifices. There's sacrifice, of course, according to Krishna and the Gita. There's sacrifices in the mode of passion, ignorance, and goodness. And there's transcendental sacrifices, right? So that's what a tantra is. You know, a sacrifice or an activity. Of course, in the left-handed tantra, Kundalini yoga. I hate to mention that. So anyway, in Kundalini yoga, sometimes there's some injunctions that. Who was that? Actually, it was one of our devotees wrote an article for the Bhakti Goddess many years ago. That was the Chuchananda Maharaj. I don't know if you remember that article. But he talked about in Kundalini yoga, in strict Kundalini yoga, one of the practices is that you take a skull of a human being and you eat from the skull. You know, that's your plate. It's biodegradable, though. You don't have to worry about hurting the environment.
It's also degradable in other ways.
Yeah, it's degradable. It's degrading. You know, it's actually, we should institute that rather than these paper plates and these things that are made from sugarcane refuse and things like that. So, anyway, so that's one of the practices. And of course, we talked about that. In the past, we talked about the Panchamakara. You've heard of that? The 5 M's that are required for those doing left-handed tantra. Let's see if I remember them. One is matcha. Matcha means you got to eat fish. Fish. Nice fish. It's like I was talking to my mother yesterday, and she said, "Oh, got nice fish today." So, matcha, mamsa means meat. Mudra means you make an obscene gesture. Maitunya, you have illicit sex. And mada, you take intoxication. So you got to follow these 5 regulating principles if you want to follow left-handed tantra, okay? So we'll be giving instructions on that later today. Not in the temple.
Or never.
Never.